Okay, I'm back like I never left. It hasn't been that long since my last video, I am sure. Let me just check the calendar. 8 months ago. See, that wasn't even that long ago. Well, let's just hop right back in. Season 3 of Thousand Year Blood War Poems. For those unaware, the poems recited after the credits of the Thousand Year Blood War anime are inspired from the poems that Kubo included at the beginning of each manga volume, almost always recited by the character shown on the cover of said volume. Some of the poems in the anime are from the manga, while others are new ones written for the anime exclusively, and I'm gonna be going into how I think they relate to or flesh out their respective characters. I'm not fluent in Japanese or poetry, so I'm not gonna be going over how accurate the poem translations are, outside of certain cases here or there, or if the poems are arranged in a proper format. So if you are fluent in Japanese or poetry, feel free to comment your thoughts down below, I'd love to read them. I'm just going to be expressing my interpretations of the poems as they relate to the characters in question, so let's pick up where we left off.
The bell will continue to toll until you fall to the earth, struck by the sword.
So we start off with episode 27. I believe this is the third Yhwach poem, or as the English dub likes to call him, Yuha Baha Blast. This dude's gotta be stopped. He can't keep getting more poems, and I guarantee you he's gonna get a fourth one by the end of this series. But this is referring to the Reo and his imminent death at the hands of Ichigo, who gets manipulated by Yhwach into impaling the Reo with his sword. Granted, the Reo doesn't actually ever fall to the earth or the ground itself, but he does fall from his status as the god holding the worlds together. I like the mention of the bells tolling though, since the noise used for the Volstendish activation is tolling bells, and it also plays as Yhwach ascends his stairs to the Reo's chamber in the episode itself. Since Volstendishes, I think that's how you pluralize Volstendish, and by extension most Quincy powers, stem from Yhwach, I like the idea of all of this heralding this one single moment that Yhwach's been working to achieve for most of his life. Like whenever you hear these bells chiming from someone entering Volstendish, it signifies Yhwach taking one step closer to accomplishing his goal. The only thing I can say is somewhat lost in translation, but not really, is this first line where it says, Tamake. It's translated as toll, which is accurate, but more in a paying a toll kind of way, as the phrase in Japanese expresses an offering to a deity or spirit, or to someone who's about to die, both of which fit the Reo. But with or without that context, the same idea gets across in both languages.
I was once you. Soon you will become me. I can only pray the lives you carry are not a burden to you.
So Ukitake was actually supposed to get a poem in the manga, but he was skipped over and the poem in that volume was given to Naklavar, and Kubo even expressed at a later point that he kind of regrets that. He was like, oh yeah, I should have given it to Ukitake. But we got a poem for him here, so great. He wins in the end. The immediate takeaway here is that this is Ukitake talking to Mimihagi, hoping that his life that he's about to sacrifice won't be a burden on Mimihagi. However, watashi is not the personal pronoun Ukitake ever uses for himself. He flips between using ore and boku depending on the situation, but never watashi. And based on the actual context of the poem, I think the idea here is that it's actually Mimihagi talking to Ukitake. Mimihagi is saying he was once Ukitake, as he had bonded with him, and soon Ukitake will now become Mimihagi, via the Kamikake, and he's hoping that this action won't be too heavy of a burden for Ukitake, which is a very kind, Ukitake-like thing to say. I'm hoping the anime does more for Ukitake, as unlike in the manga, he's not actually outright dead at this point. In the anime, he's still down there spasming and trying to hold the worlds in place, with even some tendrils of his influence seemingly cracking through to the other realms. I find that to be a noticeable change, and hope it results in something interesting in how the anime depicts Yhwach's downfall. Of course, I don't think that we're gonna deviate so far from the manga's ending that Jushiro somehow survives or something, or becomes the new Reo, but I can at least see as Kamikake being instrumental in Yhwach's defeat, which would be nice, since in the manga, his sacrifice felt like okay, well that happened, kind of situation that came and went way too quickly and with no lasting influence beyond just inadvertently powering Yhwach up. So I hope Kubo throws him a bone in the anime. That dude needs a win. A second win. I just said that him getting a poem in the anime was a win, so he needs a second one now. Cool.
I draw my bow, fingers on the star, against the moon. I thought I left behind.
Right off the bat, this poem is noticeable for being spoken by two separate people in unison. Both Ichigo and Uryu narrate this one, though based off the poem itself, it feels more like a poem tailored for Uryu specifically. Drawing a bow, as he's a Quincy, although I guess Ichigo is also a Quincy, but he doesn't use a bow. He should use one in the anime, just give him a bow. Against the moon, which would be Ichigo, the Black Moon, who uses Zangetsu, slaying moon, and Getsuga Tensho, Moon Fang Heaven Piercer, that he thought he'd left behind, as he's trying to pretend not to be Ichigo's friend at this moment by doing this whole wacky scheme of his solo. I'm not sure why he thought Ichigo and them would just let sleeping dogs lie with his own feigned betrayal thing. Surely he'd know Ichigo and the audience would not believe it in the slightest, though I suppose he was between a rock and a hard place, since Ichigo wouldn't go along with his plan anyway, even if he had filled him in on it. But on that note, bringing up Uryu's previous poem here would be fitting. We are drawn to each other, like drops of water, like the planets. We repulse each other, like magnets, like the colors of our skin. This poem is about Uryu's perspective on how people both attract and repel each other for various reasons, but more than anything about how he and Ichigo specifically attract and repel each other. They are both friends and have similar origins, but they're also on different sides of the fence, one being a Quincy and the other a Soul Reaper, with him framing the reason for why they repel each other as something similarly lamentable and unfortunate as racism. The poem feels sad to me, like he's frustrated at the relationship being more complicated than he wants it to be. But the common thread between this poem and the newest one is that they both involve his relationship with Ichigo, going from musing about the dual nature of their relationship to struggling with the fact that even when he tries to repel him, they attract each other again anyway. In any event, I'm not entirely sure why Ichigo's also speaking. The closest thing I could think of, and this is kind of neat, is that Ichigo's always been really good at reading people's thoughts and feelings. A trait of his that he's actually talked about outright to Kisuke after beating Aizen. When he clashes with someone, he can get a read on their heart. And I guess the idea here is that by clashing with Uryu at this point in the story, in the episode, he gets a feel for what Uryu's feeling. So Ichigo's also narrating Uryu's poem because he's reading Uryu's desires as they fight. Gay people can never just break up normally, huh?
To those who know not the absence of power, look toward the sky with your shattered ego. The one sky that no one could enter until the king was roused from his slumber.
An Aizen poem. Super cool. So the usage of the word shatter is obviously a reference to his Shikai release command, albeit it's written a bit differently in the poem, but it's still the base word all the same. Anyway, he's basically humbling himself. I hate double negatives and sentences worded like this. They flip my brain upside down like I was just hit by Sakanade, but he's speaking of people who don't know how it's like to be powerless. As in people who don't know weakness. And he views himself as one such person, despite the primo ass whooping he got from good old Berry Boy back in the Urankar arc. And he's humbly admitting that his ego's been just slightly shattered by the fact that fucking Chad and Ganju got to the Soul King Palace before he did. As for the king who's been roused from his slumber, one would think it's referring to the Soul King, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Yhwach, as the king of the Quincies, who recently woke up. Well, I mean, he woke up like 9 years ago, but you get the point. Setting into motion the chain of events that led to the Ryokyu being infiltrated. I can see it being about the Ryo being awoken via his death, but the usage of the word sleep here makes me feel like it's thematically more relevant to Yhwach. Sleep is a key feature of his character, down to his powers swapping with Hashvolts during sleep, and even the Wach part of his name being the German word for awake. So I think it makes more sense for Aizen to be referring to Yhwach here. One more thing to note about this poem is that it also contains references to Aizen's favorite Kido, Kurohitsugi, The last part of Kurohitsugi's chant is the phrase, "Come back down to the earth and know your own powerlessness," which is written the same way in Japanese as the "Know not the absence of power" part of this episode's poem. The chant also contains the phrase "disturbed sleep," which is also written the same way in Japanese as the "roused from his slumber" part of the poem. Of course, both of these phrases were translated differently between the two instances, most likely because the translators didn't catch on to the fact that it was referencing this chant. I guess if they wanted the poem to remain consistent with Kurohitsugi's chant, it would be more similar to those who know not their own powerlessness, look toward the sky with your shattered ego, the one sky that no one could enter until the king's sleep was disturbed. Also, on the topic of Kurohitsugi, I remember reading somewhere that the Japanese version of the chant contained a reference to some Japanese translation of the Book of Genesis, but I can't find that post anywhere anymore. It was years ago when I read this, and it might not have even been accurate anyway, maybe just speculation. But since Kubo's already surrounded Aizen with a lot of Christian imagery and themes, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some biblical references in the Kido that he had Aizen perform. I'll have to look into that some more. If any of you know anything about this or have come across this post on the internet, please post down below.
My claws will grind you up.
Man of many words, Grimmjow Jaggerjack's poem is a single sentence. Not even a sentence in Japanese, where it's basically just grinding claws. Of course, the grind comes straight from his release command, grind Pantera, and the kanji for claws can be individually found in some of his attacks, such as Gara de la Pantera and Escaron. Also, the second kanji by itself means nail, as in the Rayo nails discussed in Can't Fear Your Own World. We have a fan dub, go watch that, which obviously means that Grimmjow also has a piece of the Soul King in him. No need to fact check this, I am right, Kubo himself told me. You're welcome for this new information. Anyway, the English version turns it into more of an actual sentence when it's not really one in Japanese, but it still feels like something Grimmjow would say, so super cool. Not much else to dissect here, but on the topic of claws, I guess Grimmjow does display the ability to partially release his claws as he chases Naklevar, which is somewhat significant since I don't really remember any other Arrancar doing a partial Resurrection like that. It would be equivalent to a Soul Reaper doing a partial Bankai, though how Soul Reaper and Hollow Zanpakutoan powers work is slightly different anyway. Arrancars don't have a Shikai equivalent since they're already always in a Shikai-esque state. As in, they're always in a state where their powers are turned on, so to speak, with some of their base Zanpakuto naturally even having unique shapes and forms that are normally characteristic of a Shikai release. I suppose you could liken this to the idea of a constant Shikai, something that Ichigo and Zaraki were theorized in-universe as to having, until the existence of such a concept in general was brought into question by Byakuya later on after witnessing Zaraki's actual Shikai. I'm not sure if constant Shikai are actually even normally a thing, but at least in Ichigo's case, the idea there is that it's due to his Zanpakuto being a hollow. Ichigo is always in a Shikai-like state the same way that Arrancars are always in a Shikai-like state, like that is their sword's base forms. Now, I don't know if Grimmjow being able to perform a partial resurrection like this is actually indicative of anything, like it's suggesting that he has a Segunda Etapa now, similar to how Soul Reapers being able to perform their Shikai without calling out their sword's name and release command is an indicator of them reaching Bankai. But between this and his mask having slightly changed during the time skip, Neliel's did too, by the way, to indicate at least some shift in his spiritual pressure, I wouldn't be surprised if he's got a couple more tricks up his sleeve since before. Though neither the original manga nor Can't Fear Your Own World imply anything of the sort, so maybe the anime will expand on things and give Grimmjow some more stuff to do.
The fire that drips from fangs does not fade. The blade burns away the field, revealing my hidden friend.
Next is Renji. His poem happens in the manga way later on, but they shifted it up a little bit for the anime. Now, guys, I have something to admit. I don't know what the fuck Renji's talking about in this poem. His first one and this one. This dude's brain operates on a higher level than mine, because these metaphors just don't click with me. Here's his first poem back from volume 11. Light a fire to the fangs that cannot be reached, so that I do not have to see that star, so that I do not slit this throat. I'm guessing the fangs that cannot be reached would be Byakuya, as this would take place during when they fought, and Byakuya mocked him by claiming Renji's fangs would never reach him, though they actually did. And then the star mentioned here would be Rukia, the star and the stray dog being Renji, even though he's a monkey or a baboon or a snake or whatever. Interestingly, this means both Rukia and Ichigo are referred to as a star by different people throughout the series, so that's interesting. Ichiruki still isn't canon though. But all in all, I'm guessing this poem is Renji struggling with his feelings for Rukia by burying them under the banner of working for Byakuya. He's lighting a fire under himself with his goal of surpassing Byakuya so that he doesn't have to think about Rukia. All this is to say, his new poem also mentions fire and fangs, but I don't think it's about Byakuya here. Granted, that said, from what I understand, the translation of that first poem is a bit off anyway. It shouldn't be light a fire to the fangs that cannot be reached, but rather light a fire to the unreaching fangs, as in Renji's fangs that could not reach Byakuya, even though they did. So with that in mind, the fangs in both poems referring to Renji himself makes way more sense. Anime watchers might assume that the hidden friend here refers to Uryu, since that's who he's fighting in this episode, but in the manga, like I said, this poem comes during a way later volume, and his fight with Uryu wasn't even in the manga in the first place. So I'm more inclined to believe that this would be about Ichigo, and how Renji ended up viewing him as a close friend as time went on, through all the battles they shared together, all the fields that they burned through with their dripping flames. That doesn't sound right. I do like the usage of fire in both of his poems, though. His Zanpakuto is technically just a strict melee type, I suppose, but its Bankai definitely seems to have fire attributes in it, even in its original incomplete state. Some of his attacks used burning beams or whatever, and his complete Bankai definitely had some burning heat aspects to it, allowing him to char Masked Masculine to a crisp and such, and I do like that balance between him using heat and flames and Rukia using cold and ice.
There is only you. Be your own god.
This is also, I think, like Mayuri's third poem or something. I don't know. He has a different color scheme here, which I find interesting. I don't really know if that indicates anything. But in my eyes, this ties into Mayuri's Bankai. As I've mentioned in earlier poems, there's a lot of Buddhism integrated into Kubo's ideas for Soul Reapers, especially concerning Bankai and how to unlock them, with the whole introspective enlightenment angle and how a Soul Reaper's inner self is represented by a Zanpakuto avatar. The idea being that you have to communicate and understand your avatar, yourself, in order to achieve Bankai, achieve enlightenment. The blade is me and all that. Something which some fans think only applies to Ichigo and not all Soul Reapers, but no, the blade is me is not a thing that's unique to Ichigo, that's just Zanpakuto in general. Anyway, Mayuri's different. He didn't commune with his Zanpakuto to achieve Bankai, he used science to forcibly draw it out. As we saw in Nemu's flashback, Mayuri was able to use his memory project research to achieve the position of captain, after he was able to create Konpaku to the fetal stage and then apply that tech into modifying Zanpakuto, bringing the fetal-looking Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo to Kuna's mind and connecting the dots for us readers. The idea here being that Mayuri used his memory project research to force his Zanpakuto avatar into giving him a Bankai. Mayuri takes matters into his own hands, and he doesn't look to others for help, even when that help is coming from his other self, I suppose, or himself, really. His acquisition of Bankai goes against the entire purpose of Zanpakuto, and the point their existence is trying to help facilitate. Sort of like a science versus religion kind of thing, but that feels like too shallow of an interpretation. But this renouncement of ideas or characters that have religious undertones or themes baked into them is a sort of trend we see with Mayuri throughout the series, like with this fight with Szayelaporro, to say nothing of killing an actual part of the closest thing in universe these guys have to a god. Szayelaporro is wrapped in more Christian symbolism, what with Jesus on a cross artwork and his Gabriel ability, which brings about a resurrection, while Mayuri acts as the antithesis to that, shooting down Szayelaporro's views on perfection and stating that it's better, or good in this case. See how good is written to look like God, okay, for things to be imperfect. Which all circles back to how he treats his Zanpakuto. If Zanpakuto training and unlocking Bankai and such is all supposed to be symbolic of ideas like reaching enlightenment and perfection, then of course Mayuri wouldn't be about that life. And I'm gonna stop right here. We'll cover the second half of Season 3 of Thousand Year Blood Wars poems in the next video. Thank you for watching. And like always, if you have any thoughts on my interpretations, leave them in the comments below. If you have your own interpretations, also leave those in the comments. And if you actually know Japanese and want to point out this or that I got wrong, or may have misinterpreted or mistranslated or misread, let me know. That's always cool. And if you like Bleach in general, we have more Bleach stuff on my channel. We did an entire fandom of Can't Free Your Own World. It's really cool. My friends did a great job. And if you like stuff like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy, we do stuff like that as well. I stream every now and again. Hang out with me when I do that. Like and subscribe. See you guys next time.